We're good to go. Time to get started.
Ladies and gentlemen, George Talks Business is now beginning. Please hold as we launch the live stream.
Greetings and salutations. I'm James Bailey, a professor at George Washington University's School of Business, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this 16th episode of George Talks Business. The point of this entire series is to inform and connect, to inform the audience of the various different elements that constitute the challenges and some of the ways to approach modern business economics, but it's also to connect. It's connect science to practice and connect us to the community. We're particularly thrilled tonight because we not only have members of the George Washington University community, but also the Society for Human Resource Management, many of our distinguished alumni, and of course, other honored guests. Tonight, what we're going to be talking about is the ability of human resource management and human capital management to advance value within the business climate. And this is particularly important in today's world. If we look broadly, there are three stages of economic development or evolution within the United States and broadly within advanced economies. The first is agrarian, the second is industrial, and the third is information. Now, those are broadly put, but they more or less represent the primary work output of societies during the course of the last 250 years. But if we look at the first two periods, the agrarian period and the industrial period, workers, the people who did the work, were more or less cogs in the machine. That is, they were easily replaceable. But in the modern economy, in the information age, in the digital age, it's an entirely different situation. What a company knows how to do, its core competency resides in the head of the individuals. The knowledge is too complex to nest, to reside in a policy and procedure manual, which means the strategic advantage of any company is its people. And that's the point of today's program. So I'm really thrilled to introduce two guests that know an enormous amount about this. First is Dawn Cacciatti. Dawn is the founder of Engage Now HR. She has 25 years of HR experience. She is a passionate HR speaker. She is the co-author of the book Cultivating Culture. Her firm, Engage HR, was founded in 2014 and focuses on consulting and outsourcing HR functions around employee engagement, retention, development, and other critical issues that we'll be talking about tonight. She was also recognized by the Employee Benefit News as Benefits Leadership, Judge's Choice, and was also from the Human Resource Strategic Alignment honoree in the HRLA Awards. Our next guest is Herman Aginis, who is the Avram Tucker Distinguished Scholar and Professor of Management here at the George Washington University School of Business. Dr. Aginis is ranked among the top 100 business and economic scholars in the world. He also recently received the Losi Award from the Society of Human Resource Management for Lifetime Distinguished Contribution. He is the author of hundreds of academic articles, 9 books, the most recent of, I happen to have a copy right here, called Performance Management for Dummies. Now, I'm not implying, and neither is Dr. Aginis, that anyone in this room or anyone within the broadcast needs this book. However, I've read it and found it insightful and thoughtful, and it brings the simple points, the complex points, in a simple manner that is valuable for all of us. So, thank you. Please join me in welcoming our guests. Okay, so let's start with a very broad question. How can human resources, human capital management within an organization help to deliver business value? Herman, can you give me your first take?
Sure. First, thank you, James, Don, George Washington University School of Business, and SHRM for putting together this panel. I'm very happy to be here today because it is a very exciting time for HR. There's a talent war going on out there. 3.5% unemployment rate. This is a unique and privileged opportunity for HR to recruit, attract, and retain top talent the businesses need to compete and succeed in this economy. What is the secret sauce for organizational success? It's not that complex. Jack Welch, the legendary CEO of GE, put it like this. He said, the team with the better people, with the better players, wins. So it's all about talent. So what can HR do to recruit and get the best players so that their companies can win? HR can be an internal consultant. HR can be a strategic partner. So they can get all the functions in the company, the talent they need, which is the most critical resource they need to get their job done. If HR does that, immediately it provides tremendous value to the business because HR helps the functional areas succeed.
Don, your take?
So I think that to expand on that, it's important for HR business leaders to understand the organization's strategy, to understand where they fit in, to be able to accomplish that HR strategy, creating their own against the organizations, and being able to really have an impact on business results through the strategy that we're creating. You know, it's not just the talent area. We have so many components within HR that really help to have an organization succeed. And so being able to take that strategy and really drive it throughout the organization is really what's going to accomplish the results that organizations are looking for.
Go a bit deeper into strategy, this connection between human capital and strategy. We normally think about strategy as these big grand plans that organizations have. Are you saying that this needs to be a critical part of those plans, or is it helping to drive and support those plans?
So from an HR strategy, because as Herman said, we have such an impact across all the departments, you know, we really need to get deeper into the understanding of the organization as a whole, but then diving into each of the departments and understanding what their actual strategy is so that we can shape our strategy from HR to help them accomplish the goals. So we're more of business leaders than just HR.
Okay. So HR deserves a seat at the executive table.
Yes.
In the boardroom,
Yes.
right? I think many of us have this impression that they haven't always been allowed in there. And you're saying that they should be as important as the chief financial officer, God forbid. Is that kind of where you're driving?
I'm not driving there, I'm stating it. You know, with the amount that we actually hold in our hands for what we actually do, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that, you know, from talent acquisition to compensation philosophy to performance management. We have all of these areas, culture, engagement in the things that we impact. And so with us being able to ensure that we have the seat at the table and ensure we're making, you know, the boards more aware of what's happening in HR, I think it filters down throughout an organization once we start putting our message out there, and the business leaders understand us as business leaders also. I think that's going to help to ensure that we're always at the table. You're just not going to have the success if we don't.
And that goes somewhat to Herman's point about 3.5 unemployment. Where are you going to get the talent?
Right.
You have to be very focused and intentional about that. And Herman, pick up on this, given your specialty as a scholar. How do you help transform then this talent and the motivation of people into the strategic advantage? It's one thing to say it needs to be part of it. It's another thing to say, how does the translation and the application take place?
I think performance management plays a key role. But performance management is so broken. Supervisors hate to fill out those evaluation forms. And employees fear and dread those soul-crushing meetings where they're giving feedback once a year and that's it. So many companies like Accenture, GE, Microsoft, Adobe are moving from a once-a-year performance appraisal event to an ongoing process of performance management. And that's to your point. Performance management is about developing, measuring, improving employee and team performance, and aligning performance of the individuals and the teams with the goals of the organization. It's not just about the past, it's not just about compensation or rewards, it's about the future, and it's about alignment. It's about what are the behaviors that we need from a strategic standpoint for people to engage in so we can accomplish our strategic goals. Performance management is critical. If you're in HR, if you don't do a good performance management, if you don't have a good performance management system, you cannot create a good talent inventory. IT has an inventory. Real estate has an inventory. How can IT plan for the future without an inventory? How can real estate plan for the future without an inventory? Can HR really plan for the future without a talent inventory? Performance management lets you understand which are the strengths and the weaknesses of your workforce, what are the gaps, what do you need to do in the future, what are the needs of the functional units in terms of their talent. And again, going back to the point about adding strategic value, if you understand the talent gaps and the needs of the functional units, you can plan for the future and help them accomplish their goals.
Good. Don, pick up on this in as much as you're a practitioner. You've been a practitioner. You go into organizations and help them realize this. Are there specific practices that help take those talents and the internal motivation and the intrinsic motivation and the desires of the people in the workforce and in that organization and help to translate it into superior performance or the things that we need to know about?
Right. So, in the day-to-day, Herman's right, it isn't about the assessment. It's not about that annual sheet that people are filling out. When you're talking at its core about performance management, you're talking about effective continual communication. And in order to have that continual communication, the management has to be able to, really ensure that the staff knows exactly what their role is, how they're actually impacting the business. And that's where performance management succeeds and where HR needs to ensure that the managers are getting the training that they need at all levels on great communication. Because it's the beginning of a day, how are you setting your staff up? In the midst of a day, what are you doing in the follow-up? At the end of the day, how are you wrapping up on the actual results that they're having? And are they seeing themselves actually being able to produce something that is going to help the performance of the organization and themselves? Because, it is right, there is that motivational piece, and managers not only have to communicate effectively and continually, but they also have to understand the drivers of the individuals that they're managing. And so that's hard for a lot of people in the day-to-day, and we don't talk about performance management as communication most of the time. We think about it just as a piece of paper. But it doesn't matter what you're saying on a piece of paper. It's what matters is what you're saying in the day-to-day, getting that connection and getting them to perform the results and the actual pieces of what you need them to do to accomplish the goals.
Okay. I sometimes ask the question in my classes, how many of you love your performance appraisal system? We've got 2, 3 and I think it's exactly for the reasons being articulated here. Is they don't always capture what are the most important behaviors, and some of those behaviors are actually sort of belief-oriented in a way. For example, employee engagement. So a recent Gallup poll showed that only 34% of the U.S. workforce feels engaged. So how can this be driven by this human capital and the strategic orientation behind it? Don, can you pick up on that one?
Sure. So let's start with how I like to describe engagement. I break it down into 3 areas. First is the employee passionate about the organization, the mission, the values, the strategy of the organization. Is the team member, secondly, understanding their role, as I talked about in the performance management area? Are they understanding their role in accomplishing what needs to happen for the department goals, and then how are they impacting the overall strategy of the organization? And then thirdly, are they willing to give discretionary effort? And that discretionary effort has a big impact on whether or not the organization is going to succeed. And so with those 3 components of what engagement is, HR fits into that that area of making sure that they're creating a strategy around building trust within the organization, which is one of the key components, I think, within having engaged staff, and that trust that has to happen, that transparency and the pieces that an HR leader is going to do around their strategy starts with being able to have ownership. And so, and having that trust there really helps accomplish that. And so we as HR leaders can shape not only our strategy from the overall aspects of what we need to do, but we also have to implement the engagement components and the culture components of what needs to happen in an organization too. So,
Herman, what's the research say about employee engagement?
Let me pick up on that third point, Don, the issue of discretionary behavior. The literature shows 2 different kinds of performance. One is called task performance. That's what you're supposed to do on the job. That's typically what's included in your job description. There's another type of performance called pro-social behavior or organizational citizenship behavior, which is discretionary. That is going above and beyond the call of duty. Engaged employees do OCBs. Employees who are not engaged do not do OCBs. Let me give you an example. There are 2 workers working on cubicles next to each other, and one of them is expecting a very important call from a client. He goes to the bathroom for 5 minutes and the phone rings. Does the other coworker pick up the phone when it rings or not? That's OCB. So think about what are the industries or the professions where workers are very engaged. Teachers, nurses, military. For these jobs, what these people do is not just task performance. This is not a job. This is not something they do. This is who they are. Their jobs are their identities. So if we can enhance engagement through aligning identities, values of the workers with the identities and values of the company, you can create a very engaged workforce. Many companies do this, for example, through corporate social responsibility. PetSmart is one example. They have a whole philanthropy branch where they help orphaned pets and animals who have been abandoned find homes. If you work for PetSmart, you obviously like animals. You like to work with pets. So if you see that your company is doing these kinds of things, you're more engaged. You're willing to go above and beyond. So it is very important when we think about engagement and we think about OCBs, what is the company doing so that there's alignment between the values and the identities of the employees with the values of the organization?
Good. We have time for just one more question here, and then we're going to turn to questions for the audience. And remember I said that part of the point of this was to connect, right? And part of that was connecting what's done and known between the academic world and done and known between the practitioner world. And that's why we have this particular pairing of guests here. But there's still a disjoint here that's sometimes called the science-practice gap. And Herman, I know you've done some research on that. So can you speak briefly about that? And then I'm going to turn this to Dawn and ask what practitioners can do to help guide the research of us academics.
Yes, thank you, James. This is a very critical point. I am guilty as charged in that many of us professors do research that is not very applicable or relevant for practitioners. Also, the journals in which we publish our work are very technical and not easily accessible. On the other hand, many HR practitioners, and just managers in general, implement practices that are not backed up by research. And maybe that's why so many of those practices fail. So on the one hand, we have professors doing highly rigorous research that is not very relevant sometimes, and you have practitioners doing very relevant work that sometimes is not very rigorous. Did you know that there are about 60 journals in which HR professors and management professors publish their work? They publish about 5,000 to 6,000 journal articles every year. How many HR practitioners read the journal articles that HR professors write? Not very many. So we try to bridge that gap between science and practice at GW in the School of Business. For example, doctoral students work on projects that are applied. We also have undergrads engage in research early on. And the performance management book is the latest effort trying to bridge science and practice. But if you are an HR practitioner, let me give you a suggestion, okay? Why don't you call one of the GW professors once a month or every other month and take them out for lunch. I promise very few professors will say no to a lunch invitation. So let's start that conversation. Don talked about performance management being a conversation, communication. Let's open up those lines of communication between professors and practitioners. So practitioners can talk about the issues that should be investigated, and professors can talk about the data that they have they can share with practitioners.
Good. Don, I think Herman covered a little bit of where you might want to go, but how can that professional world inform the academic world so that we can create knowledge that is evidence-based that then can turn around and help advance practice? What can you, because it's a two-way street, right? It shouldn't be one or the other of us doing this. This is about connection. Right.
So I think from an HR perspective and how we can help researchers, and education, institutions also, is to be more forthcoming on what is really happening out there in the field, because we don't always talk about it, and we also need to make sure that they're answering the right questions for us. Like Herman said, if I'm knowing that there's specific areas that need to have research or needs to be addressed from an educational standpoint, we need to start reaching out, and in a way that we're not giving up our competitive advantage on anything, but what is the areas that we need help with to really make sure that we're successful. The other thing I think that's really important in this, James, is that a lot of times I read the research and it's done on a scale for organizations that are quite large. And I can tell you, I work with small and mid-sized businesses, and the majority of people out there work in small business. So when the research is happening, make sure that the information that's being delivered is delivered on different scales. From what's needed to understand from a large businesses, what's needed from the small business, have it broken down into different components, because that's really what's going to help us. And it's not just one set of data and thinking it's going to be okay for everybody. It doesn't work that way.
I'm reminded of a line from Alice in Wonderland, where Alice asked the Cheshire Cat, well, which way should I go? And the Cheshire Cat said, well, that very much depends on where you would like to end up. And she said, I don't really care much where I end up. And he said, well, then it doesn't make any difference where you go. And I think that's the point that we're trying to make here, is that for us as academics to know where to go, we have to know where the community, where the practitioner community needs us to go. And by blending those things, by trying to find not just the synergies, but the ability to identify the issues and deliver on them from the research that we do to inform the other community, is answering the Cheshire Cat's question. And so at this point, what we'd like to do is turn this over for questions from the audience. And by the way, for those of you that are tuning in remotely, we've already solicited some questions, so I have some of those from you. But let's start from this audience. Do we have one over here? Please.
So I would love to go back to the topic of data and research. And Dr. Innes, is there data and research, for example, that you can introduce that you feel is glaring in your world that practitioners don't seem to get? Like, where do you see as one of the big disconnects, for example?
Whoever wants to take it.
Did the audience hear the question?
Could you repeat that, please?
So the question is, what are some of the research domains that would be perhaps most informative for HR practices at this point? Did I encapsulate your question? So like I said, there are 50 to 60 journals publishing 5,000 to 6,000 articles. I can tell you what are the things that are ahead of research. The practitioners are engaging in practices. We don't yet have research to support what is being done. People analytics, big data, artificial intelligence. Everyone is talking about it. We don't really know what it is. We don't know how to do it. Or we don't know if it works. So that would be an area where I would be wary from the perspective of practitioners, and I would talk to a researcher and say, can we work together, perhaps do a little experiment in my firm, or maybe I am a member of a chamber of commerce, I can put together 20 small businesses, do a little study, we try something in 10 businesses and the other 10 we don't, and we'll look at the result. And I think that would be a very good way to bridge or narrow the science practice gap in a way that will produce an interesting research result for the researcher and interesting practices and effective practices for the practitioners.
Okay, great. Let's do another question. Yeah. Burley Brunson, by the way, everybody, one of our distinguished alumni.
Yes, the question I have is coming at it from the, if you will, the employee or the prospective employee perspective. In this day and age, candidates submit their resumes into this black hole called the internet. And my question is, how can a candidate distinguish him or herself in this environment?
Don,
So-
you're the one that's on the receiving end of some
Yeah,
of these
I'll
applications.
take that. And doing, search on occasion, I will tell you to distinguish themselves, doing the research ahead of time of the organization really showcases that they've done their homework, that they understand what the mission is of the organization, they've looked at the values of the organization, they are talking about how they can contribute. You don't see that a lot. And so, I put on my HR hat even as I'm, doing the talent search and coaching at the same time. So I have the management hat and the HR, component of talent search. And I find myself coaching people that I'm actually interviewing that are not doing it appropriately, and giving them the opportunity to do the research and then get back to me and explain to me why they're a fit, because it's on their paper, but they're not being taught or understand how important it is for them and their career to be involved in an organization that they believe in, that they're passionate about, and that they're going to make a contribution to. And it's one of the main questions I ask, what are you passionate about? And if you can't even say what you're passionate about, or why your passion fits in with this organization, you're not going to ultimately be happy. And so, these are things that, like I said, it's, we need to be teaching everybody, because it doesn't matter how many years of experience that the people I'm talking to are on the phone, on the initial screens, or even in person sometimes. These are things that will distinguish them to do the homework ahead.
We have time for one more quick question, and to our guests, by the way, a quick answer. So, please.
I think somebody up here was actually first.
Okay. So my question here is, there is a misconception, I believe, about performance management, where organizations feel that this is a post-employment process. But from what I've learned from my professor here, it's a cyclical process that begins from the time an organization thinks about hiring people and goes around and around. Can you explain to this group here what that process really means, and for people to be able to understand what those preliminary process entails?
Yes, you can go ahead and purchase my book. Sorry. I had to put the plug in there. But yes, thank you. All right, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry we weren't able to address that thoroughly. I want to mention just one. We're not going to address a question from our remote visitors. This question can't be answered. If culture eats strategy for breakfast, how can a junior manager change culture? I would have no idea. I've been a professor and a practitioner for almost 30 years. I would have no idea how to answer that. So let me close by saying a few things here. The first is the obvious and evident need for a very rigorous and vigorous program advancing and managing talent within an organization to tap their performance and the role of human resource management in doing that. Second, that HR needs a seat at the table, and I mean the big table. I mean the C-suite. I mean with the CFO, with all the influence that they have. Third, that academics can advance to this. We can help, but we also need to know from the practitioner community what kind of help that they need. So, to wrap all this up, I want to again thank all the members of the George Washington University School of Business community, the Society of Human Resource Management community, all of our alumni, everybody that was able to tune in or be here today. The point of George Talks Business is to inform and connect. We hope we've done that tonight, and we hope to see you in September. Thanks very much.